For content warnings and a written version of this chapter, please check the description below. This is the first chapter of serving one of a donut from Cakeopia, called A Doughnut in Cakeopia. Strawberry jam-filled doughnut, or SJ as he preferred to be called, was a short, plump doughnut. His skin was soft and golden brown, and his cheeks were squidgy like the face of a baby. His eyes were round and polished, holding muted red irises, as if they were small blobs of jam holding a strawberry seed of a pupil. Every part of SJ was filled with sticky strawberry jam, and if he were to cut himself in some way, that is what would have bled out. His brown skin was lightly dusted with powdered sugar. This often slid off, causing it to snow wherever he walked, leaving a trail of powdered sugar in his wake. He was a bold boy, but hair was not needed for him to make an impression. His clothes did that all out on their own. SJ had been born in the year 1532, and he, like most of the residents of his home city, wore clothing befitting the time of their birth. He wore a silken white shirt against his skin, which was not only comfortable and suggested wealth, but also had the practical use of not showing off any powdered sugar that might have come off his skin onto his shirt. The shirt itself was frilled at both the neck and the wrists, comically pushing the plump boy's head up as if it were being squished. Over his shirt, SJ wore a doublet, a sort of tight-fitting jacket. This was cream-coloured and buttoned up from bottom to top with shiny brass spherical buttons, which themselves looked like miniature doughnuts sitting atop his clothes. To finish the look, SJ wore vibrant red striped breeches, which looked almost as if jam had been piped down them in neat lines. Under these, SJ wore tight white stockings that were tied up where they met the breeches. His shoes were not so exciting. They were simple brown leather items with a simple buckle to fasten them onto his podgy feet. You would think that with such an old-fashioned outfit in the modern world that this would be what made SJ stand out, but no. In fact, the world was filled with so many fashions and so many buildings from so many eras that SJ with his Tudor look and his Tudor home blended in nicely. It was in fact his name that made SJ feel like the odd one out. SJ was a doughnut, living in a city of cakes. The name of the city was Cakeopia, which did nothing but add insult to injury. SJ didn't feel as if he belonged in Cakeopia. He remembered the days when no such city existed, and everyone was free to go to and fro whenever they wished. There were rumours that places like that still existed, but Cakeopia was not one of those places. The city had been built around SJ, trapping him within its boundaries. No one entered and no one left the city unless they were a newly born cake, but then they would be held within the city walls, never to leave. SJ was far from the only doughnut in Cakeopia, but he was perhaps one of the oldest, and one of the only ones who remembered a life before the city. SJ avoided most of the other doughnuts. They may have been comfortable living in a city run by cakes, but he was not, and he had gotten to the point where he wanted to do something about it. SJ decided he would take his worries to the very top and speak directly to the woman in charge, Victoria Sponge. Victoria lived in a 19th century mansion in the centre of Cakeopia. The city had been built purposely around it as its central point. As far as SJ knew, Victoria was a sweet leader with big dreams and ambitions. She always treated her citizens with respect and admiration. At least he thought so. SJ had never directly met Victoria, so he could only go off hearsay from other Cakeopian citizens, such as his good friend Apple Pie, who seemed to be faced with the same predicament of having a city built around him, but he was far less worried about such a thing. SJ was unsure whether Apple Pie had actually met Victoria, or whether it was just a tale he spun up to impress people, but either way, Victoria had built a beautiful city in the almost 2 centuries she had been there, and its residents loved her. SJ didn't blame them for being content. Content was good, but content he was not. Everywhere SJ looked, there were free cakes for every one individual that wasn't a cake. Doughnuts, pies, flans, tarts, and crumbles were all greatly outnumbered by cakes. SJ didn't want to be the odd one out. He wanted to be free and live among whoever he wanted, where no one would judge him for his name. Doughnuts were often the butt of jokes, being podgier than most. It seemed like most of the cakes judged by looks, and not what was inside. SJ knew that, like himself, many cakes were filled with strawberry jam. Isn't that what should matter? What's inside? Their similarities, not their differences. Feeling particularly sullen one day, SJ left his small Tudor hovel and headed over to Apple Pie's American colonial-esque home. Though Apple Pie was born sometime around the 1300s, the man adopted a more late 17th century look. He wore a long-length loose linen shirt under his tan-coloured doublet. This item of clothing was something Apple Pie had always admired on his friend SJ, and the moment he saw the opportunity to throw out his old medieval robes, he jumped at the chance to throw a doublet on. Like SJ, Apple Pie also wore breeches, but his were more of a plain dark brown colour, which had fastened to his knees. He wore long socks, which again were a rustic kind of brown, and plain leather shoes without the buckle. As for his face, Apple Pie was a strong-jawed man, with golden brown skin that looked slightly darker in areas such as his cheeks and nose. His skin didn't fully cover his face, it crisscrossed over his filling, like a lattice. This was both intriguing and gross, as often his filling would slop out of one of the little squares before quickly rejuvenating itself. This act of filling falling out is possibly why Apple Pie wore brownish-coloured clothing to disguise any likely stains. Apple Pie's eyes sat on the same strip of skin segmented by a couple of open squares. They were brown, only slightly darker than his skin, and so made it difficult to see whether or not his eyes were open or closed. Apple Pie also wore a wig. It was a simple white wig stained by some of his bronze apple filling, and was held in a ponytail adorned with small pieces of leaf-shaped pastry, which danced from the tip under the brown ribbon, and up to the top of the wig, which sat calmly under a tall brown hat. After confiding in Apple Pie that he wanted to ask Victoria's permission to leave, SJ was taken aback by the response of his friend. "Leave, SJ? You can't. No one can leave Cakeopia. Victoria forbids it." The way Apple looked around nervously after saying the word forbid set alarm bells off in SJ's head. "The way you say forbid makes it sound like she's a..." Apple Pie placed a hand over SJ's mouth, leaving a trace of pie filling on his friend's podgy lips, where his hands held the same lattice effect as his face. He pleaded for SJ to be quiet and held his hand there until he felt positive that he couldn't say anything more. "I thought you liked Victoria," SJ asked, feeling brave enough to speak and causing a sigh from Apple Pie, who was now on edge. "Don't worry about it, SJ. Be content in Cakeopia like everyone else." SJ nodded in acceptance to Apple Pie, but instead he knew more than ever that he wanted to meet Victoria for himself, and see why exactly a supposedly sweet and kind leader would forbid people from leaving her city, and why Apple Pie was so quick to sing her praises when it was clear his old friend feared the woman. Who is Victoria Sponge, and what does she want? SJ asked himself later that day, staring at his reflection in a pane of glass rested against his damp wooden wall on his old wooden desk before getting ready for bed. What does she want? SJ repeated again before blowing out the candle on his old wooden nightstand. What does she want? SJ said it one last time, yawning in the dark and closing his eyes, ready to meet both the next day and Victoria Sponge. If you enjoyed this story and you'd like to see more videos, please consider donating to my Cash App. The cash code is on the screen and it will also be linked down below. This supports both my stories, my everyday life, and just me in general, including my transition. I plan to release 3 videos a week on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. I call these the T days. These are the days that I plan to release my videos. My next video will be released on Saturday, and it will be the latest story in my Classics Retold series. So please subscribe to see more videos like this. I hope to see you soon. Bye.